Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to ICANN Initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So today we will start with a story of the day. So once there was this young man who goes to Socrates, who is a very well-known ancient Greek philosopher, and then he asks him, what is the key to success? Socrates says that you come to me in the next morning, we'll meet near the riverside. So the next day, man goes with Socrates to the river, and they go inside the river. Then Socrates catches the man by surprise, and he pushes the man into the river. And he keeps his head down there. He doesn't allow the man to come above, and the man starts struggling to breathe. And only when Socrates sees that the man has turned blue and is just any moment he will die, he pulls the man's head above the water. And then at that time, Socrates asks, what did you want the most when you were under the water? The man replied, air. So Socrates said that is the most important, that is the key to success. When you want something as badly as you want to breathe, that is when you get success. So there has to be a burning desire in all of us that we need to accomplish something. The same applies even with UPSC. So every year you see that lakhs of aspirants apply for the preliminary examination, but only a few hundreds come out in the final list. So it is always said that in the ladder of success, it is always crowded at the bottom and it is not crowded at the top. Because while you keep climbing the ladder, there are several people who give up on the way and who drop down. That is because they don't have the burning desire. So I hope that you all have that burning desire and you all want to be officers as badly as you want to breathe, and that's when success will be yours. So with this quote, we'll start with the first topic of the day, which is about the Global Nutrition Report. So the Global Nutrition Report has come, and the important statistics that you have to remember is that 144 million children under the age of 5 are stunted. Stunted means too short for their age, and 47 million children under the age of 5 are wasted. Wasted means too thin for their height, and 38 million children are also overweight or obese. So this is the broad data that we need to remember about the nutrition status in the global level. Basically, the Global Nutrition Report measures 6 nutrition targets. So one is it measures the wasting among children, then stunting, then overweight, then the prevalence of anemia among the reproductive age, then it measures the low birth weight prevalence, the prevalence of low birth weight, and also breastfeeding. So these are the 6 nutrition targets that the Global Nutrition Report measures, and this particular report says that as far as India's performance is concerned, it is going to miss the global nutrition targets which it was supposed to achieve by the year 2025. So these targets are going to be missed. So let's have a look at some important statistics which the report says, and you can use it in your answers. So while quoting the data, do write that it is from the Global Nutrition Report. You have to mention that. So the data says that among boys, the prevalence of underweight rate among the boys is 58%, but the global average for that is just 36%. So the global average for underweight rate among the boys is 36, but in India it is 58%. So similarly, when we go to girls, the prevalence rate for the underweight is 50% in India, but the global average is 32%. So again, we can see that compared to the global average, it is not global average, it is the average in Asia. So compared to the average in Asia, the Indian rates are comparatively very high. And another thing that the report points is 1 in 2 women, every 1 in 2 women in the reproductive age, they suffer from anemia. And also the report points to 2 very important observations which are related to first the income inequalities, and also second with respect to the urban-rural divide. So the first thing that the report also observes is that the stunting levels in Uttar Pradesh is over 40%. and there it is saying that the stunting levels among the lowest income group is more than double the stunting levels in the highest income group. So for example, the stunting levels among the highest income group is 22%, but the stunting levels among the lowest income group is 51% in Uttar Pradesh. So you can see that it is more than double the prevalence of underweight in the higher income group. So this shows how income disparity can contribute to malnutrition and stunting. The second important thing it notes is the urban and the rural divide. So here it notes that the stunting prevalence is 10% higher in the rural areas as compared to the urban areas. So these data points to those areas of the where we need to have policy interventions. So by giving support to the lower income groups and by giving support in the rural areas, we can bridge this gap. So these are the important observations from the Global Nutrition Report, which you should remember for quoting in the answers. The next topic we'll be talking today is regarding the center-state relations. So the reason why this has now again become important is because during the COVID crisis, the center has been issuing directions to the states, and the states have not received them well. So that has resulted in some fissures between the center-state relations. So at the outset, let's see what Granville Austin's view is. So we know that Granville Austin is a constitutional law expert, and what he says is even though in India there is a strong center, but it is only the cooperation between the center and the constituent units, that is the states, only that can lead to the progress. So the progress of the republic rests upon the cooperation between the center as well as the states. Hence he stresses on the importance of cooperative federalism. So this is very important for a country like India. So let us see what were the recent issues that has led to development of these fissures in the center-state relations. So now that is mostly with respect to the classification and categorization of the districts as red, orange and green. I'll explain that in detail. When we talk about the legislative relations between the center and the states, so we know that the constitution provides for 3 lists. In the list 1 is the union list. It has those subjects on which the union legislature, the parliament alone, can enact laws. List 2 is the state list, on which it has those subjects on which only the state can enact laws. And list 3 is the concurrent list, on which both the center and the states have the power to enact laws. There are also few subjects which have not been mentioned in any of these 3 lists. So that is what is referred to as the residuary power. So these residuary subjects, as far as they are concerned, it is only the union parliament which has the power to enact laws on these residuary subjects. Alright, so when we talk about the COVID crisis, first that comes to picture is the public health and sanitation. Public health and sanitation is a subject that is under the list 2, that is a state list. So which means the state governments have the primary responsibility to handle public health and sanitation issues, and we all agree that corona crisis is a public health issue, which means the states must be having the primary responsibility to handle this. At the same time, under the residuary powers comes disaster management. So under this residuary power of disaster management, which the union has, it has enacted the Disaster Management Act, in which the disaster has been defined very widely, and it includes disasters which are even biological in nature, such as a pandemic. So from this residuary power, even union has the power to enact laws on subjects like pandemic. So government has now, using this residuary power, been giving directions to the states under the Disaster Management Act. So now what the states are saying is that public health and sanitation and the corona crisis comes under this, so they have the responsibility. But now what the center is doing is, it is under the Disaster Management Act passing some mandatory directions, binding directions to the states, which the states will have to mandatorily abide by. So this is infringing their legislative competence in those areas where the state actually has the power to enact laws. Now in this regard, Supreme Court has come out with what is called as the doctrine of harmonious construction. So now, what is harmonious construction? Harmonious construction just means that whenever there is an overlap of subjects on which the union and the states can make the laws, in such case of an overlap, always the general thing should be seen as if the general thing does not include the specific thing. Now, I know you must not have understood this. I'll explain it. So now there is disaster management, which is very general in nature. So this, apart from health related disaster, also has several other disasters under it. So health is just one aspect under disaster management. So this is under the center. But the states have a specific subject which is called as public health and sanitation, and this directly deals with the health. So this is very specific, while Disaster Management Act is more generic, which among other things also includes health. So what the doctrine of harmonious construction says is, whenever there is this overlap, so here health is overlapping between two things. So whenever there is an overlap, we must we must act as if this general law, this general subject does not include this specific subject. Reason being, while this general subject was being considered, if the constitution makers had considered public health would also come under this, then they wouldn't have given a specific entry under the state list of public health. Because they didn't consider this under this, that is why the specific entry has been given. So therefore, that is how we must interpret, so that there is no overlap, or rather there is no issue over this overlap, and there is harmonious construction in cases where the subject entries overlap. So this is what is should be done. But now this is the current issue that is happening between the center and the states as far as the legislative sphere is concerned. There is overlap of subjects. Center is trying to issue binding directions under disaster management, which comes under the residuary power, but the states are saying that public health and sanitation is in the state list and they have the primary responsibility in dealing with the crisis. So this is as far as the legislative relations between the center and the states are concerned. There are also few issues when you come to the financial relations between the two. For instance, the center has said that all those corporate entities who are making contributions to the PM CARES fund, they can avail the CSR exemptions. CSR is corporate social responsibility exemptions. But those corporate entities which are making contributions to the Chief Minister's Relief Fund, they won't get the CSR exemptions. They can't avail the CSR exemptions. So naturally, to avail the exemptions, the corporates will definitely donate to PM CARES and not to the Chief Minister's Relief Fund. So this is actually making the states more starved of funds, because this whole provision is incentivizing the corporate entities to donate to PM CARES and not for the Chief Minister's Relief Fund. Another thing is that the state's resources, financial resources at present are already drying up because there are no liquor sales happening. The petrol and diesel use is also less because of the fall in the economic activity. And even when we come to the GST collections have fallen, and the center has also not given to the states, dispersed the states what the states owe, also the center has not dispersed. So the GST overdues also have not been dispersed to the states. That is another issue in the financial relations between the two. And the center has not relaxed the cap of borrowing for the states also. So these are all the financial relations between the two. So whenever you get any question on the center state administrative, legislative and financial relations, so you can include the most recent angle also. So these are the recent legislative and financial relations between the center and the state. The next thing we'll be talking about is always the dilemma is there between the fundamental right and national security. So fundamental rights, yes, they are definitely there, but whenever we say that national security is under the threat, then fundamental rights are always compromised. But where is the balance? Where lies the balance? Where is it we draw the line between the two? How far can we go to compromise a fundamental right in order to safeguard the national security? So this has been in news particularly because there was a petition before the Supreme Court regarding the restrictions of the internet connection speed in the Jammu Kashmir. So in relation to this debate on fundamental right and national security, where do we find the balance? So in that case, what should we do? The first thing is to follow the doctrine of proportionality. So the first thing is follow the doctrine of proportionality. So whenever these rules are imposed, it is important to identify if the restrictions that are imposed, is it proportionate to the benefits that we may derive by imposing those restrictions. That is very important. For instance, in this case, restrictions are being imposed on the internet, but is that proportionate to the benefit or the gain that I want by restricting the internet? So this proportionality should always be there. So the first question where we must ask as a way forward before imposing such restrictions is, does it adhere to the doctrine of proportionality? The second thing is, very often section 124 of the Criminal Procedure Code is imposed in J&K, which imposes wide restrictions for the people. But however, whenever such restrictions are imposed, there are no territorial limits that are specified, nor there are any temporal limits specified. That is, okay, this one section 144 is going to be there for a week or a month. That time limit is also not specified. So that should not happen. Whenever section 144 is invoked, it should come with territorial limits and temporal limits. Otherwise, it should not be done. It should not be acceptable. So that rule must be made that there has to be limits, clear limits is specified as to what is the area over which it is applicable and over a period of what time it is going to be applicable. So this limitation should be specified, and it also has to be reviewed from time to time, so that whenever the normalcy returns and whenever the situation is better, then it can be revoked. So that is why a periodic review also needs to be done wherever 144 is imposed. The third thing that we must do is, we must ask the question that for what purpose we are putting this restriction. Is it serving the purpose? For instance, when the Article 370 was abrogated, the center started imposing restrictions on the internet speed, and it told that this is mainly done because the good internet speeds are being misused by the terrorists to carry out terrorist activities. So here the right question we must ask is, now that we have restricted the speed of the internet so that the terrorists should not be misusing it to carry out terrorist activities, has it led to any decrease in violence in the region? Has it decreased the number of terrorist attacks or incidents in the region? So what has been noticed is that even after the data speed has been limited, there has been a spike in the incidents of terrorism since last year, including the recent encounter at Handwara. So the question that should be asked is whether the restriction imposed is actually resulting into what the purpose was for imposing the restriction. So this is the third thing that we must do, and if we follow these three procedures, these three processes, then we can manage to strike a fair balance between the fundamental rights and the national security. We'll now go to the next topic, which is a conflict of interest. So if you have seen the past few ethics papers, GSCO papers, you must have seen that time and again they ask to define this and explain it with examples and why it is not a good thing. So for instance, what is crisis of conscience, what is voice of conscience, what is conflict of interest, explain it with examples. Why is it bad for a civil servant, and how to remove the conflict of interest in civil service. So all of these are very common questions, so you must know what it is. So conflict of interest means that there is a conflict on the one hand between a person's professional responsibilities as a public servant, and on the other hand his private interests as an individual. So on the one hand is the professional duties, and on the other hand is the personal interests. So between these there is a conflict. So that is called as a conflict of interest. So this more often than not gives rise to an ethical dilemma. So for example, if you are in an interview board of a selection committee, and if your family member is only appearing for the same interview, then definitely there is a conflict of interest. Whether as the member of that interview board, you have to make a fair and an objective choice regarding who should be given good marks, or should you do favoritism for your family member because the person is your family member, and so that gives rise to conflict of interest. So recently there was one such example. So this you can quote in your answers as well. So what happened in Karnataka, the Labour Department had a secretary, M. Maheshwar Rao. So the Labour Department Secretary had proposed a dilution of the labour laws. For instance, increasing the working hours for the labourers from 8 hours to 12 hours and diluting the other labour laws. So that was proposed by the Secretary of the Labour Department, who is M. Maheshwar Rao. So now M. Maheshwar Rao has also been made the Secretary of the, he was a secretary of the Industries Department, and he had proposed these dilution of labor laws. Now M. Maheshwar Rao has been made as the secretary of Labor Department as well. But as part of the Labor Department, he is supposed to protect the interests of the laborers. But as a secretary of the Industries Department, he had proposed a dilution of the labor laws. But if the same person becomes the secretary of both the Industries Department and the Labor Department, then there is a clear case of conflict of interest. So this example we can quote in the exam. So this is a diagrammatic representation of conflict of interest. On the one hand is the institution, the interest of the institution and your duties towards the institution, and on the other hand is your personal interest and your personal loyalties. So there can be conflict between these two, and trust me, this is one of the most frequent conflicts probably you will come across when you become a civil servant. So we'll go to the next. Today we'll be now discussing yesterday's question. Now before I start the question, I want to tell you one thing, that tomorrow I'm not going to make a ICANN video because tomorrow is my birthday, and I want to have some time with my family, because ever since the lockdown I have been busy with these videos and all, so I've not been able to give good time to them. So I want to relax and enjoy time with them tomorrow. So I won't be making the video, and tomorrow's newspaper I'll be covering partly on Friday and remaining on Monday. So you don't have to worry about the coverage, but tomorrow there won't be any video. So part of the question was about the relevance of Rajya Sabha, should it be there or not, and part of the answer we have already seen in yesterday's discussion, that what role has Rajya Sabha played in our polity. So yes, it should be there, because we will revise whatever we learned yesterday, that it offers checks and balances, it checks any hasty decision made by Lok Sabha. Then it is also a smaller body, so it will help in better deliberation and discussions on the bill. That will be more effective because it is a smaller body. Then Rajya Sabha has nomination of personalities from diverse fields like art, science, literature, social service. So these experts will be able to contribute in the policy formulation. Otherwise it wouldn't have been possible for them to get elected and make the contribution. Then it helps to have that second opinion and on whatever decision has been taken by Lok Sabha. Then it ensures federal equilibrium, because the states are getting representation in the Rajya Sabha, and Rajya Sabha members are not directly elected by people. Then it also offers continuity, because Lok Sabha gets dissolved but Rajya Sabha is a continuous chamber, so it provides that continuity in the governance that is needed. And also bicameralism is the basic feature of the constitution itself. So that's also a reason why we must go with Rajya Sabha. So these are the reasons why Rajya Sabha should continue. But at the same time, there are several issues that plague Rajya Sabha. So first of all, we will discuss that. The first thing is that the reason why Rajya Sabha should be there has been argued is because it ensures federal equilibrium, it gives representation to the states. But if you see that today's Indian polity is very fragmented. So different regions and different states are well represented in Lok Sabha. There are several regional parties. So we may not need a separate Rajya Sabha to ensure representation by the states, because of these regional parties. Different regions and states are already well represented in Lok Sabha. So we don't need a separate Rajya Sabha for that. The second is that even if we have a Rajya Sabha telling that it gives a representation to the states, but Rajya Sabha is no longer providing such a representation to the states, because the representatives they have narrow regional agendas also, and they speak on party lines and they don't speak for the states. So it no longer represents the states. That's what we can say. The third thing is that we spoke about nominations, how we can give representation to those experts who can contribute in policy making, but it has been used as a parking ground. So parking ground for those people who lost the Lok Sabha elections, for the crony capitalists, for the retired CEOs and civil servants. So it is used as a parking ground. So that part is also not functioning well. And even when nominations are happening, for instance, the recent one, you can see Ranjan Gogoi's ex-Chief Justice nomination. So immediately after retirement, the nomination was given. So this can be used as a tool to ensure that the judicial pronouncements are in government's favor. So the misuse of nominations is also another issue. So this must also be considered. Then when we talk about the composition, even the composition is same as the Lok Sabha. It has become almost similar to Lok Sabha. So it is said that Rajya Sabha has failed to carve a niche for itself in over these many years after independence. Even the Supreme Court has remarked in Kuldeep Nair's case. So you have to mention important cases. So in the Kuldeep Nair's case versus Union of India, Supreme Court has also remarked that Rajya Sabha has turned out to be just another chamber of parties which is similar to the Lok Sabha, except that the mode of election is just different. Apart from that, when it comes to working, it has become just the same thing. Then even in Rajya Sabha, you can see that there have been several disruptions, many hindrance to passing of legislations has been there. If you would say, for example, the GST bill or the constitutional or giving the constitutional status to PRIs and ULBs. So in these cases, the Rajya Sabha, because of Rajya Sabha, it took so many years to pass those bills. So this has been hindrance to passing of good legislative measures also. Then because of all these things, when Rajya Sabha has not been able to make its own unique contribution, we can say that it is unnecessarily increasing the financial burden of the exchequer. So it is not that useful also. And also because the productivity of Rajya Sabha has decreased. So till 1997, the productivity was more than 100%. But between 2015 to 2019, the productivity has been 61%. Alright, and similarly, Rajya Sabha also has another important function which is called as the oversight function. That is to ensure the accountability of the government through the questionnaire, the calling attention, etc. So the amount of time that was spent performing the oversight function by Rajya Sabha in 2015 till date has been just 12.3%. Only this much time is being spent performing the oversight functions. So because of all these, we can say that Rajya Sabha has not been able to perform the role which the constitution has envisaged for it. But at the same time, it doesn't call for an abolition of Rajya Sabha. Rather than replacing, we must reform Rajya Sabha. So for instance, we must have equal representation for each state, similar to United States, so that large states don't dominate the Rajya Sabha. Then second thing is, even the states, the state legislators must question the members of the Rajya Sabha regarding upholding the interests of the states or speaking for the states. So this accountability should also be there. And even in, when you see in the Rajya Sabha, the time to speak that is given to the members depend upon the strength of the party. So smaller parties usually get ignored. So this should also change. And there are so many disruptions and unethical behavior. So the ethics committee, the privilege committee, so all of that should take care of the disruptions and unruly behavior by the members. So if we reform it, then definitely it is the basic feature of the constitution and ensures federal equilibrium, and therefore it is a very important link and to have a cooperative federalistic setup in the country. So therefore we need to just go for reforms in the Rajya Sabha to ensure its better functioning. So that should be the concluding line of argument. Now so today's question is what is malnutrition and what are the causes of malnutrition in India? A 10-mark question to be written in 150 words. So that's it for today. Thank you.